King Henry III of France, whom we know from Alexandre Dumas' novels, was seen as a life waster, full of vices and flaws, and most of all, he was effeminate and depraved, as eloquently written by the 16th century historian Théodore Agrippa d'Aubigné. His pearls and lace are worn under a wide-brimmed hat in the Italian fashion, with whitened skin and blush, leaving no trace of his face, his eyebrows and beard completely plucked, powdered with talc. His appearance resembled that of a harlot rather than a king. He wore his repugnant attire all day, as dissolute as his love for vice. Looking at him would confuse and anger both men and women. Was he a king or a woman? Yet what kind of hero was Henry III? Was he positive or negative? How easy is it to be a beloved son of Catherine de' Medici? Which woman was the great love of Henry's life? How did he become the King of Poland and secretly flee back to France? Who was the mastermind behind a famous political assassination of the 16th century? And how did Henry himself become a victim of political assassination? This story of Henry III took place in the 16th century. He was the last thread upon which the French royal dynasty, ruling for 261 years, snapped. Henry's parents, Catherine de' Medici and Henry II, married at the age of 14. Their marriage was childless for 11 years, and Henry had several illegitimate children. He was deeply infatuated with Diane de Poitiers, who was 20 years older than him. We also have a video about the fate of this remarkable woman, the link for which is shown on the screen. Catherine de' Medici spent years seeking remedies for her infertility, using various treatments of the time, such as drinking donkey urine, sitting in a bag of cow manure, and strapping deer antlers to her abdomen. The royal physician and astrologer, Michel de Nostradame, advised Catherine to, quote, ride horses, take long walks in the forests and meadows, stay in the sun near water, and strangely and mysteriously bend and straighten her limbs several times a day. On the other hand, Diane de Poitiers was more straightforward, simply advising the king to spend more time in the marital bed. In 1544, their first royal heir, Francis, was born, and later, Catherine gave birth to 9 more children, though not all survived childbirth. 7 survived, but all except Marguerite had poor health and lived only until the ages of 30 to 38. Henry was the 6th, born in 1551, and at birth he was named Alexander Edward, a name he changed to Henry at 14 during his confirmation. From an early age, according to chroniclers, he earned a reputation as the most charming of princes, the best built and most handsome of his time. He was elegant, beautiful, and charismatic, enjoying widespread popularity. As a child, his mother's ladies-in-waiting often dressed him in women's clothes, sprayed him with perfumes, and adorned him with jewels. At Charles IX's coronation in 1560, the crowd greeted Prince Henry with more enthusiasm than King Charles, even though one was only 10 and the other 9. Henry received a good education, and his teachers were famous figures of the time, such as the Bishop of Amiens, who was known for his translations of Aristotle and works on political perfection. He spoke Italian, which allowed him to read Machiavelli's The Prince and converse with his mother in the language. Like all nobles, Henry was an excellent dancer, swordsman, and took part in all courtly feasts, never missing a single opportunity. He was charming, witty, and easy to be around. Catherine de' Medici loved Henry more than any of her other children, calling him her little eagle, and signed all her letters to him as your tender, loving mother. He reciprocated her affection and respect throughout his life. At the age of 9, Henry became interested in the Huguenots and began calling himself a little Protestant. He drank gaga, a term for an alcoholic beverage, and sang hymns, not adhering to Catholic rites. His romance with Marie of Cleves resumed after his return. One story from this period, full of gossip and speculation, tells of how Henry showered Marie with gifts, including those he had once received from a former mistress. The lady recognized the jewels and items she had given him, and humiliated by their reappearance on arrival, spread the story across the court. However, Marie boldly declared that the monsieur had the right to dispose of his possessions and gifts as he pleased. This great love story ended in tragedy. Marie gave birth to a daughter and died 2 weeks later. Her husband acknowledged the girl as his own. A note bearing the news of Marie's death was slipped under Henry's door. According to witnesses, the blow was so great that Henry fainted upon reading it. He locked himself in his chambers for several days, refused food, and lay staring at the ceiling. From time to time, he would cry out or burst into loud sobs. Those around him began to fear for his sanity. When he finally reappeared, he was adorned with symbols of death. Skulls were attached to his shoes and dangled from his laces, and his entire outfit was covered in morbid imagery. In 1575, at the age of 24, Henry was crowned king. He bore an extraordinary number of titles: Duke of Angoulême, Duke of Orléans, Duke of Anjou, Duke of Bourbon, Duke of Auvergne, King of Poland, and Grand Duke of Lithuania, but now also King of France. During his 14-year reign, France endured 8 wars. Nevertheless, he carried out reforms in central governance and finance. He introduced the livre de compte, an accounting unit backed by gold and silver, instead of coinage, and established a magnificent court whose splendor was envied by monarchs across Europe. Henry chose Louise of Lorraine as his wife. She bore a striking resemblance to Marie of Cleves. Before the wedding, Henry personally brought his bride pearls and jewels, oversaw every detail of the preparations, and was obsessively critical of the tailors and jewelers. He even styled her hair himself. Louise endured all of his whims with boundless patience. The king kept their relationship private, but historians believe that his lack of extramarital affairs indicates he truly loved his wife and enjoyed a peaceful family life with her. The couple, however, had no children. It is believed that a miscarriage rendered Louise infertile. Public opinion soon turned against the royal couple, blaming their childlessness on either Henry or Louise. Rumors suggested Henry might have had 2 illegitimate children, but this was never confirmed. In hopes of conceiving, the royal couple frequently visited mineral springs, believing in their healing properties, but their efforts were in vain. Louise blamed herself and suffered deeply from the king's reproaches. Besides visiting resorts, the couple made pilgrimages to holy sites, which not only proved ineffective but also damaged their health. When the queen was bedridden for months with a high fever, Henry spent nearly all his time by her side, comforting her as best he could. At the same time, the king turned his bedroom into a place of reverence. Courtiers were expected to bow to the royal bed. He gave immense importance to fashion and personal grooming. After his morning routine, he would dress in tight-fitting clothes, usually black or dark brown. He fixed a jeweled pin to his hat, wore 3 rings on each hand, and always carried a gold chain with musk flasks and 2 pairs of gloves, one light and one ornate. Even while dining, he wore gloves soaked in hand cream and used a long 2-pronged fork, since his enormous ruff collar prevented him from lifting food to his mouth by hand. Henry traveled in a massive carriage, accompanied by friends, jesters, dogs, parrots, and monkeys. He was surrounded by his male entourage, the mignons, or favorites, who acted as both his advisors and bodyguards. He called them his sons, and they were fiercely loyal. Many accuse them of being his lovers, but historians doubt these claims, noting the lack of evidence. These rumors were likely spread by Catholic factions seeking to undermine his authority. A contemporary wrote, "He loved his favorites boundlessly without knowing why." In 1578, during a series of public duels, nearly all of Henry's mignons were killed. In their memory, the king erected mausoleums and elevated the 2 survivors to the rank of princes of France. Henry's character and demeanor changed beyond recognition after their deaths. Twice a week, Henry would don a blue hair shirt. He was often seen during large processions, walking from church to church with his fellow penitents. This public display was perceived by his subjects not as piety but as hypocrisy. His reign became one of the most turbulent in French history. For decades, France had been torn apart by religious violence. Catholics slaughtered Huguenots, and Huguenots retaliated in kind. The Catholic faction was led by Duke Henry of Guise, while the Huguenots were headed by Henry of Bourbon, King of Navarre, who was married to Henry III's sister Marguerite, the same Queen Margot. The two Henrys, Guise and Navarre, were both in conflict with their namesake, King Henry III, who attempted to navigate between the Catholic and Protestant factions. The French dubbed the escalating civil strife the War of the Three Henrys. Carefully assessing his chances, King Henry III concluded that his hold on the throne depended on reconciling with the Huguenot leader, Henry of Navarre. When Pope Sixtus V learned of the king's negotiations with the Huguenots, he excommunicated Henry III. Upon hearing of the excommunication, Paris rose in revolt, forcing the king to flee to the Loire Valley for his life. At that time, the Huguenots devised a plan to kidnap the king's brother in order to influence royal policy. The conspiracy was uncovered, and young Henry witnessed the hanging of the Huguenots and heard the cries of the condemned. Catherine de' Medici took charge of her son, and over the course of 3 years managed to steer him away from Huguenot sympathies, transforming him into a fervent Catholic. The world of high politics entered his life early on. Endless strife between Catholics and Protestants prompted the calling of the Royal Council. The young King Charles devoted most of his time to hunting rather than to affairs of state. His younger brother, Henry, acted as royal lieutenant, sat on the council, defended the interests of the kingdom, read the mail, issued decrees, ensured their implementation, planned military campaigns, and oversaw the recruitment and provisioning of the army. Henry of Guise became the de facto king of Paris. The combined armies of the other two, Henry's laid siege to the city, where the Duke of Guise and his allies had taken refuge. The king could not simply arrest Guise and put him on trial. First, he could not have held the Duke under arrest, and second, no court in France would have convicted Guise of treason. Thus, the only option left to the king was assassination. When rumors of the king's plot reached Guise, he dismissed them, saying, "The king has no malice in his soul." Using deceit, the king lured the head of the Catholic League to negotiations, then ordered his 45 royal guards to kill him. Guise attempted to draw his sword but couldn't. He received no fewer than 10 blows, each potentially fatal. "What betrayal, gentlemen, what betrayal!" he cried out just before receiving a final stab to the abdomen. "Lord, have mercy on me," he murmured. And so occurred one of the most notorious political assassinations of the 16th century. Yet the Catholic League did not collapse. Its new leader became Henry's younger brother, the Duke of Mayenne. Their sister, the Duchess of Montpensier, vowed revenge for her beloved brother's death. She immediately sought out someone willing to assassinate the King of France. That man was a 22-year-old Dominican friar named Jacques Clément. Contemporary accounts describe him as suffering from delusions of grandeur, believing he was destined to fulfill a divine mission. At the same time, the young monk had a notable fondness for women, a grave sin for a friar. Madame de Montpensier decided to exploit this. She seduced him with her charms and urged him to murder the heretic king, cursed by His Holiness the Pope. She made no small promises. Jacques was promised a cardinal's hat, and if he died, eternal bliss in heaven. He was also assured that God would make him invisible to the eyes of heretics. And in case the Lord failed, Madame de Montpensier informed Jacques that she had ordered 300 supporters of King Henry III to be arrested in Paris. They would serve as hostages, to be exchanged for him if necessary. Filled with zeal, Jacques left Paris with forged letters to the king and posed as a secret envoy from the Catholic League's enemies. He managed to secure a private audience with the king. During the meeting, he suddenly drew a stiletto and stabbed Henry III in the abdomen. "The damned monk has killed me." the mortally wounded king exclaimed. Jacques Clément made no attempt to flee, convinced that God would render him invisible. But the king's guards, rushing to the scene, quickly killed the assassin. A friend of Jacques Clément was later drawn and quartered. Before his death, Henry III named the head of the Huguenot party, Henry of Navarre, as his successor. Henry of Navarre eventually managed to end the French Civil War. He famously declared, "Paris is worth a mass," and converted to Catholicism. He was later crowned in a Roman cathedral as King Henry IV. The Bourbon dynasty he founded ruled France for another 2 centuries until it was overthrown during the French Revolution. Credit must be given to King Henry III, who was burdened with the responsibility of ruling during such a difficult and tumultuous time. At 15, Henry was entrusted with the governance of 3 duchies. A year later, as another religious war erupted, he was appointed lieutenant general and became the chief commander of the royal troops. Thanks to the prince's talent and the advice of seasoned military leaders, the royal army achieved several crushing victories over the Huguenots, and Henry gained fame, with comparisons being drawn to Alexander the Great. However, Henry never enjoyed warfare and preferred resolving conflicts peacefully through negotiation. Soon after, Catherine insisted that a new position be created for Henry, general intendant, effectively allowing him to share power with his brother. As a triumphant victor over the Huguenots, Henry arrived in Paris for the wedding of his sister Marguerite to Henry of Bourbon, King of Navarre. Incidentally, we also have a video about Queen Margot, the link to which is shown on the screen. 5 days after the wedding, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre took place. Between 2,000 and 3,000 people were killed in Paris, with another 10,000 Huguenots murdered across the provinces. Women, children, and the elderly were slaughtered indiscriminately. The poet Théodore Agrippa d'Aubigné wrote, "The wind turned into moans and screams, and the Seine turned to blood." It was only with great difficulty that order was restored. Henry's role in the massacre remains unclear. Some say he and his mother persuaded the hesitant Charles IX to initiate the slaughter. On the other hand, historians often attribute sadistic tendencies to Charles IX himself. He was said to enjoy torturing animals and watching violent scenes, and some accounts claim he personally shot at fleeing Huguenots. Henry, by contrast, was fond of animals, especially tiny dogs, of which he owned several hundred. No one ever accused him of cruelty. In any case, Charles assumed full responsibility for the massacre. Henry's personality and behavior made him stand out at the French court and even across Europe. He became a symbol of a miraculous prince, handsome, earring-wearing, and a seducer of women. The Venetian ambassador in Paris wrote of Henry's jewelry, "1 earring per ear was not enough. He required pairs adorned with gems and pearls." He was not the only one to do this. His grandfather, Francis III, and many wealthy contemporaries did the same. Inspired by this adoration, Catherine decided to secure a crown for her favorite. One option was a marriage to Elizabeth I of England, who was 18 years older than Henry, but negotiations quietly stalled without a formal break. Another possibility was marriage to the 5-year-old Infanta, daughter of King Philip II of Spain. Henry himself had no ambition for marriage or the crown. He was content with his position at the French court, basking in glory and indulging in passionate affairs. Many women experienced the sweetness of his embrace, but his romance with Marie of Cleves has survived through time. Marie, Countess of Beaufort, was a cousin to both Henry of Navarre and Prince Condé. Just before the famous wedding of Henry of Navarre and Marguerite de Valois, she was married to Henri de Bourbon, the second Prince of Condé, a malicious and belligerent dwarf. The wedding festivities of Henri of Navarre and Marguerite de Valois became the backdrop for their story. Henry III, then Duke of Anjou and heir to the French throne, noticed Marie of Cleves. There exists a story about their first encounter, likely a fabrication. During a ball at the Louvre, Marie danced so passionately that her undergarment became soaked with sweat. She retreated to a room in the palace to change, where her maid inadvertently left the damp garment on a chair. Later, Henry entered the room, mistook the shift for a towel, and enchanted by its scent, fell in love with the unknown woman who had worn it. He discovered her identity, visited her, and when asked to return the garment, declared it too precious to give back. Instead, he gifted Marie a lavish ruby brooch, and from then on the two began exchanging secret letters and messages, though their affair was no secret at court. Henry even considered asking the Pope to annul Marie's marriage to Henri de Bourbon, Prince of Condé, so he could marry her himself. However, an obstacle stood in the way. After the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the couple had converted to Catholicism and renewed their vows in a Catholic ceremony. In 1573, after elaborate scheming, Catherine de' Medici managed to have her beloved son elected King of Poland. Rumors spread that the previous Polish king, Sigismund Augustus, had not died of natural causes, but was poisoned by agents of Catherine. The new Polish monarch assembled his court and took his time departing for his new kingdom, where he would reign for 125 days. His royal entourage included 100 horses, carriages, noble ladies, and women of easy virtue. To the Polish nobility, Henry appeared as a tall young man with noble features, courteous manners, and a dignified demeanor. Along with the Polish crown came the sister of the late king, Anna Jagiellon, who was nearly 30 years older than Henry. In love with Marie of Cleves, the young king wrote her daily letters. Rumors claimed he wrote them in blood, though none have ever been found. Henry showed little eagerness to marry, and Anna felt insulted. Eventually, the king set a date for a ball where the engagement would be formally announced. Yet the day before the ball, Henry received a letter from his mother, urging him to return to Paris immediately. King Charles had died, and Henry needed to claim the throne before Henry of Navarre could seize it. To leave Poland, Henry resorted to deception. He hosted a grand feast at Wawel Castle, intoxicating the Polish nobles to the point of collapse. Without drinking a drop himself, he quietly slipped away. In pursuit, the Poles dispatched Count Tenchinski with a group of mercenaries. When they finally caught up with Henry on Austrian soil, the situation resolved peacefully. The Count received a diamond from Henry in exchange for freedom and a promise to return. Thus ended this adventurous comedy in Poland. Henry had disliked the Polish political system, where everything was decided by consensus and the king was merely a figurehead. According to him, the only worthwhile thing in Poland was Wawel Castle's sewage system, which efficiently removed waste from the premises. Upon his return to Paris, Henry had a similar system installed in the Louvre and also adopted the practice of bathing once a week.